If there was one charged or loaded word in the fitness and nutrition world, I think it would be the word fat. Yes, with the meaning to describe people who are overweight, but also the nutrient. For multiple decades, fats were the bad guy, and low-fat diets were the way to go, end of story. We now know that it's not even close to being that simple, but the bad reputation still lingers a bit to this day. The reality of fats is that some are better than others, and the analogy that I like to use is a stoplight. The red light fat is trans fats, and I made a whole video on them. To summarize, it's best to cut these out entirely, and recent societal and legal shifts have made that easier to do. To me, the yellow light is saturated fat, a category of nutrient that has been on a bit of a redemption arc for a while now. A small amount of it is essential, but past a certain point, it's largely just unnecessary calories, and data still points to overconsumption of these being harmful. And I have over time changed my view of polyunsaturated fats to the point that I would call them a yellow light as well. The two main types of polyunsaturated fats are omega-3s and omega-6s. Omega-3s are extremely underconsumed by most people, but they are essential for the proper function of your brain, heart, eyes, and much more. Omega-6s are also essential, but the key difference is they are pro-inflammatory, which has its uses for immune health, but too much of them can contribute to chronic inflammation, and these are way overconsumed by the average person. Thus, the yellow light designation. Sometimes you slow down, and sometimes you speed up. And that brings us to our through line for today, monounsaturated fats, the green light of the fat world. The overwhelming majority of natural monounsaturated fat is oleic acid, with the distant second and third most prevalent being palmitoleic acid, which has a slightly shorter fatty acid chain length, and gadoleic acid, which is slightly longer. They are essential, and the general consensus is that in reasonable amounts, they can really only do good. They are shown to reduce the risk of heart disease, having a significant impact on our old friends LDL and HDL, lowering and actively raising them respectively. They are shown to combat chronic inflammation, which is a leading contributor to many chronic diseases like heart disease, arthritis, Alzheimer's, type 2 diabetes, and COPD. Keep in mind, some inflammation is helpful to enable the body to fight off harmful toxins, bacteria, and viruses. Chronic inflammation is when it goes too far and it starts to turn in on its own healthy cells. They are shown to improve insulin sensitivity, effectively combating high blood sugar and the risk of type 2 diabetes. Diets with sufficient monounsaturated fat are also shown to have a lower risk of many types of cancer. They are the best option for fat-soluble vitamin absorption, and on that note, often come with a vitamin E content, which is deficient in many people. They're used in cell membranes structurally, and they're quite satiating, which can be helpful for weight loss endeavors. Here's the thing, they do it all. I could go on and on, but I don't want to spend the whole video on this. You get the point. I want to get to the individual foods, as that's what this series is supposed to be about. I'm getting all of this out of the way, so that way I don't have to repeat myself 10 times. Just know that when you see these high monounsaturated fat contents, this is what I'm referring to. Monounsaturated fats are like protein in the sense that while they are not everything, in practical terms, they are objectively good. That is the rule, and any conflicting data that says they can be harmful, which granted does exist, is the exception. But this intro's already chewed up enough time, so without further ado, these are 10 foods full of monounsaturated fat. And we're going to start off strong here with perhaps the go-to example of a monounsaturated fat food, olives. Both the unripe when harvested green olives and the ripe when harvested black olives are pretty much the poster child for the nutrient. Olives are naturally comprised of about 10 to 15% fat, and roughly 75% of that is monounsaturated, notably oleic acid. Both types contain a relevant amount of the fairly elusive vitamin E, and black olives are rich in copper and especially the all-essential iron. Olives are full of antioxidants, both familiar and unique, including quercetin and tyrosol, which are well known for lowering blood pressure and boosting heart health, and how they are shown to reduce certain chronic disease risks, including various cancers. But also oleanolic acid, a more distinctive antioxidant that's a notable anti-inflammatory and has been used to aid those with diabetes and to protect against toxic damage in the liver. Olives are also often considered to be one of the most underrated anabolic driving foods. The main talking point involving olives, though, is the processing. It's fairly difficult to find unprocessed and not prepackaged prepackaged olives. And this is not the end of the world, but there are definitely some things to be aware of. Olives are usually cured and fermented to rid of bitter compounds to make them more palatable. The fermentation is believed to increase beneficial bacteria levels, though. The biggest red flag of the processing is the high acrylamide content. This is a carcinogenic compound that is also found in tobacco smoke. Producers are actively trying to find ways to minimize this acrylamide content, but it still very much exists as of today. Prepackaged olives are also very sodium dense for preservation. Some people just need to watch their sodium intake, but it's not a concerning amount for the overwhelming majority of people. As for where to include olives, both green and black fit perfectly in pretty much any Mediterranean-style dish, but other common inclusions are in salads, soups, eggs, rice, and of course, pizza. I had them in a comparatively lower tier in my fruit tier list, but you know what, olives? Perhaps I treated you too harshly. And next up is another food that I might have treated too harshly in the past, macadamia nuts. Now, many people probably think of macadamia nut cookies, but I promise they do exist outside of those. Macadamias are about 73% fat, and of that fat, roughly an astonishing 82% of it is monounsaturated. This is the highest monounsaturated to total fat ratio in the video. Of that amount, about 75% of it is oleic acid, and an impressive 21% is the omega-7 palmitoleic acid, which is shown to be very helpful for fat loss. This absurdly high monounsaturated fat content provides some serious anti-inflammatory effect and combatant of metabolic syndrome. Macadamias are also the lowest in polyunsaturated fats of all nuts, including pro-inflammatory omega-6s, which many people try to avoid too much of. Macadamia nuts are an impressive source of many micros, manganese, magnesium, iron, and B vitamins, notably B1 and B6. And they are also antioxidant rich, not nearly as much as some other nuts like pecans, almonds, or walnuts, but still a relevant amount. Macadamias are actually the highest of tree nuts in flavonoids that fight inflammation and lower LDL cholesterol. Macadamia's antioxidant content is particularly shown to help combat neurodegenerative diseases. Additionally, of the about 13 grams of carbs in macadamia, 8 grams of that is fiber, giving it a higher fiber to carb ratio than most nuts. I personally find macadamia nuts are best as a snack on their own, but it's pretty easy to get creative with them in meals as well. There's also such thing as macadamia nut oil, and the monounsaturated fat aspects apply to it as well. Overall, this is the monounsaturated nut, and debatably even the #1 monounsaturated food as a whole. Now, the majority of high monounsaturated fat foods are plant foods, but I wanted to do my due diligence and address meat sources as well. And imagine my surprise when I come to find out that pork is the most consistent representative, having an on-average monounsaturated fat to total fat content ratio that edges out that of beef and lamb. Standard pork cuts and ground pork are usually found between 10 to 25% fat, and on average 49% of that is monounsaturated. And surprisingly, that higher monounsaturated fat content applies to most pork products as well. All of bacon, Italian sausage, breakfast sausage, bologna, salami, Spam, chorizo, and even hot dogs fall between a 40 to 50% monounsaturated fat to total fat content. Pork in general tends to be the fatty red meat, so while the overall quantity doesn't surprise me, the ratio certainly does. And I've talked about red meats many times, so I'm going to try and keep everything else brief. Overall, red meat is a good protein source, most pork being between 20 to 26 grams per 100 grams. It is rich in phosphorus, selenium, zinc, and most B vitamins, especially vitamin B1. Pork is rich in 3 of the 4 C's of red meat: carnosine, creatine, and choline, as well as taurine, an antioxidant amino acid. And again, there's so much about red meats like pork that's already been said many times on this channel. I'm just tired of meat having the reputation of only being saturated fat. It's just not true. Any discussion about monounsaturated fats would be incomplete without addressing avocados, one of those foods that I just can't seem to stop talking about. If olives and olive oil were not the poster child for monounsaturated fats, then avocados and avocado oil would be. They're about 14 grams of fat per 100 grams, and roughly 72% of that is monounsaturated, primarily oleic acid. They're probably the most popular and accessible food with this dominant of a monounsaturated fat content. And avocados have important nutrients beyond healthy fat as well. They're very fibrous, being comprised of about 7% fiber, which improves gut health and beneficial intestinal bacteria. They're a notable source of vitamin K, vitamin C, vitamin E, and potassium, and they're rich in anti-cancerous phytochemicals. And avocados truly are one of the most versatile foods on earth. You can include them in sandwiches, on eggs, in guacamole, poke bowls, avocado toast, or just literally any Mexican or Mediterranean-style dish. If you have any creativity at all, you'll find a way, and if you like avocados, I personally see no reason for this to not be a regular inclusion in your diet. Normally when it comes to fat in seafood, the spotlight is on omega-3s, so I was pleasantly surprised to find that eel of all things is actually a great source of monounsaturated fat. Eel on average contains about 13 grams of fat per 100 grams, and about 70% of it is monounsaturated. The interesting thing here is that it is heavy in non-oleic acids. Of its monounsaturated fat, 39% is oleic acid, while 42% is gadoleic acid, and about 17% is palmitoleic acid. Gadoleic acid is what's known as an algal metabolite, produced by algae through metabolic reactions, and it largely has a lot of the same benefits as oleic acid, but add on to that antimicrobial and neuroprotective benefits as well. And let's not forget about the roughly 850 milligrams of omega-3s. Beyond fat, eel has an average of 24 grams of protein, and it's very microdense, even for seafood, containing high amounts of vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin A, vitamin B12, zinc, and potassium. Eel is most commonly consumed as what many people think of as unagi, which is most associated with sushi. It is definitely more of a delicacy, but one that more people could indulge in. While macadamia nuts are the best for this topic, I would be remiss to not give hazelnuts some time in the limelight as well, as they are almost as high in their monounsaturated fat content. For the record, I'm only going to be covering these two nuts in this video, but in case you were wondering, a fairly close third is pecans. Hazelnuts contain about 60 grams of fat per 100 grams, and roughly 78% of it is monounsaturated. Hazelnuts are an excellent source of manganese, copper, and vitamin E, and a good source of magnesium, iron, and vitamin B6. Hazelnuts are considered very heart-healthy due to the monounsaturated fat and vitamin E antioxidant content. In fact, hazelnuts are a top 3 antioxidant nut, with the most abundance being phenolic compounds that are proven to lower blood pressure levels and markers of chronic inflammation. As for how to eat them, they work best as a snack but seem to be a popular base to add on other stronger flavors like chocolate, cinnamon, or spicy peppers. Overall, hazelnuts are just a perfect example of what this video is about, having monounsaturated fat as the primary takeaway nutritionally. Now, I know I just said I was done talking about nuts, but peanut butter, that's a different story. That's still on the table. So if you're looking for a sweeter way to include some monounsaturated fat, this may be part of your solution. In fact, many peanut butters actually have a higher monounsaturated fat content than peanuts themselves. Peanuts are about 50% fat, with 53% of that being monounsaturated, while the average peanut butter is also about 50% fat, but typically nearer to 63% of that being monounsaturated. I would assume this is the case because of the inclusion of other ingredients like palm oil or high oleic sunflower oil. I'm not saying you should be choosing these oily versions, but what I am saying is that numbers are numbers. Beyond fat, peanut butter's nutritional profile is a bit complex, containing 20 to 25% protein, 20 to 25% carbs, roughly 9 to 15% sugar, and between 5 and 7% fiber. Peanut butter is also a sufficient source of magnesium, phosphorus, copper, selenium, and B vitamins, and key antioxidants like coumaryc acid and resveratrol. Now, I must emphasize that processed peanut butters are shown to have issues with inflammation frequently cited, and obviously this is not for people with a peanut allergy. This is certainly not the ideal choice. It's a bit of a compromise to get your monounsaturated fat compared to most other foods in this video. But I do think well-made peanut butters that actually keep health in mind can be an underrated and legitimate nutritional piece of the puzzle. So this next one is a little bit of a cheat, but I wanted the opportunity to talk about pesto again. Pesto is a paste-like sauce mainly comprised of a green or herb, usually basil, pine nuts, garlic, and olive oil. It is quite possibly the most nutritious condiment out there and the only popular one that comes to mind that's made largely of an olive oil base. Your typical pesto is going to be about 36% total fat, and roughly 62% of that is monounsaturated. It is also a surprisingly relevant excellent source of protein as well as vitamin K, vitamin E, and calcium. Basically, everything in pesto is anti-inflammatory, and when you couple the oil with the garlic, suddenly we see some very impressive antimicrobial properties as well. It's very common for people to just add olive oil to a dish, so the next time you do that, consider pesto instead for a more flavorful experience. While olive oil tends to be the go-to monounsaturated fat addition, there are many other oils that can also effectively fill this role, and I think an underutilized one is almond oil. Almond oil is about 73% monounsaturated fat, which is comparable to that of olive, avocado, and hazelnut oils. It is full of vitamin E, one of the very best sources, which you should really just expect from anything almond related. This is a key antioxidant that's just really good at doing what antioxidants do, combating chronic inflammation and cognitive decline while boosting immune, heart, and skin health. And there's not much more to say that I didn't already cover in the intro. The overwhelming majority of almond oil's benefits come from it being an untainted monounsaturated forward oil, and its benefits involving heart health, cholesterol, and blood sugar revolve around that. Now, almond oil is generally not recommended to be a high heat cooking oil. Instead, it's encouraged to be used as a dressing of sorts and for low heat baking and stuff like that. In the end, this is just another option to help get your monounsaturated fats in a new and uniquely flavored way. And the last food in this video is the one that I feel the most strongly about for this specific topic, that being poultry fats, specifically goose fat, duck fat, and chicken fat. Animal fats often get the reputation of being all saturated fat, and while the majority of them are higher in saturated fat, that does not apply as universally as people seem to think. Here are the average fatty acid compositions for the 6 most commonly used animal-based cooking fats: butter, lard, tallow, goose, duck, and chicken fats. And I think you'll notice that 5 out of the 6, all of them except butter, which is dairy-based, are not nearly as saturated fat dense as they are often talked up to be. Actually, lard is the most hated on one, and it's more monounsaturated than saturated. But the numbers are clear. If you want monounsaturated fat from animal sources, poultry fats are your answer. They're obviously not as dense in the nutrient as the widely accepted to be heart-healthy plant oils, but poultry fat lends a unique option in terms of flavor, access, and more importantly, they are much better suited options for high heat cooking. On top of that, they're also a fair source of vitamin E and a genuinely good source of choline, the X vitamin used in cell membranes for neurotransmitter production and cholesterol transport. Poultry fats are not changing the world by any means, but they can be a game changer for your high heat cooking. High omega-6 vegetable oils are still the most widely used option for this task, and not only does the data show that swapping those out for poultry fats is better health-wise, I think you'll find it to be a lot more flavorful as well. Not every aspect of nutrition is going to be flashy. Sometimes your body just needs to stay in the green. And these days, when it can feel like every single other food is trying to kill you through inflammation, diabetes, cancer, or whatever else, it's nice to have an ace up your sleeve that can reliably and consistently combat it all. And it's a good idea to know where you're going to get said help and to maybe keep some of it around the house. Now, if you enjoyed this video, or at the very least learned a little something, I encourage you to subscribe as I have plenty more of these on the way. Go ahead and let me know down in the comments what other topics you think would fit well in this 10 foods format. And remember that all I ask is that you do your own research and advocate for your body. You only get the one.